All right, so again, we're working backwards here. I've given the graph, and now we can state all of these different things. So let's take a look at the first one. This thing is eventually heading up, so I'm going to say it is positive and it's increasing because it is eventually heading up. The degree, that's sometimes a little tricky, but I see 3 turns here, so I would say, well, that's going to be a degree 4. It should probably be an x to the 4. Roots, well, those are right here. So I'd like to, we can write them down if you want, and then you can write down the factors. So I've got 1, 2, 3, 4, 5. So -5, -2, 0, and 4. So when I write that down as my factors, this has to be the opposite, x plus 5, because -5 would have made that 0. And this has to be x plus 2. Now this one has to be x plus 0, or x minus 0. Problem is you don't need to write plus or minus 0, so you could just write an x. And then this needs to be an x minus 4. So you can just double check. This is should be a positive, because it's increasing, it should be a positive x to the 4. And if you go x times x times x times x, sure enough, that's a positive x to the 4. The constant is the y-intercept. So the y-intercept is, you can just find from here by making all of these 0. So if you make this 0, this 0, this 0, this 0, so you would have 0 plus 5, 0 plus 2, 0, and 0 minus 4. You get 5 times 2 times 0 times -4. Well, anything times 0 is 0. And sure enough, I do cross here at 0 when y is 0. So, that's all I needed. So there's my factors. I got my constant. I got my roots. Because it looks like, right here, it looks like 1, 2, 3, 4. It looks like it crosses at 4. But remember, for these, the y-intercepts, they never really match. So we actually have to find that number out completely. Okay, take a look at the next one. It is eventually heading down, so it's decreasing. The degree, there is 2 turns, so I would say it's an x cubed, but it needs to be decreasing, so I'll put a negative x cubed. The roots are 1, -2, and -4. 1, -2, and -4. So my factors, when I do this, I can say, well, x minus 1 would have got me the 1. X plus 2, -2 would have worked. And x plus 4, -4 would have worked. The one thing about doing this, however, is that you also, because it's negative, one of these x's has to be a negative. And that's really, really hard to do. So one of the things that we can do instead is put a -1 out in front. Because then when you multiply your x's, you can go x times x times x times -1, which will give you a negative x cubed. Alternatively, that -1 that we wrote here, you could just bring it into one of these. Multiply it in. So you could multiply this in, for instance, this one, and make it a negative x and a positive 1, and then x plus 2 and x plus 4. And watch, it still actually works. Because what makes this thing 0? -4. What makes this thing 0? -2. And what makes this thing 0? Well, if you put a 1 here, -1 plus 1 is still 0. So it still works. So it's kind of a sneaky way to do that. So you can tack on the negative here. The only reason I did that, remember, is because I knew it was decreasing. It was a negative x cubed. Now, when you do your constant, you have to actually put this in. So I'm going to use this one. -0 plus 1, 0 plus 2, 0 plus 4, which gets you a 1 times 2 times 4, which is an 8. And if you wanted, you could put it in here. You'd get a 4 times 2 times -1, which is -8, times by the -1, which would make it a positive again. Okay, so let's try this again. Hopefully there's, of course it's a decreasing. So it's a decreasing one, so we're going to have to do that negative trick again. So it is decreasing, because it is heading down here at the end. At the very end, it's heading down. So decreasing. the degree. So there's 1, 2, 3, 4. So there's 4 turns. So I would say it's an x to the 5, but it's negative because it is decreasing. The roots. So I've got 5, 1. Yeah, so 5, 1, negative 1, negative 2, negative 4. So 5, 1, negative 1, negative 2, and negative 4. So for this, I need to make these up. So x minus 5, that would give me 5 would make that a 0. X minus 1, a 1 can go in there. X plus 1, this one would work. X plus 2, and an x plus 4. So all of those would work. But if I multiply all the x's, I go x times x times x times x times x. I get an x to the 5, but it needs to be negative. So you can tack a negative 1 out in front. So that can be an answer. I'm actually going to bring this negative 1 in. So I'm going to make it a negative x and a positive 5. And then x minus 1, x plus 1, x plus 2, and x plus 4. And lastly is the constant. So negative 0 plus 5, 0 minus 1, 0 plus 1, 0 plus 2, and 0 plus 4. So I'm going to have 5 times negative 1 times 1 times 2 times 4. So it is a negative number. And 4 times 2 is 8. 8 times 5 is 40. So it's negative 40. So it doesn't look like it, but believe it or not, this is supposed to be negative 40. Okay, so that'll be the end of this video. I'll do the next ones on the next video because it might get it even a little bit more complicated. Just remember that it's decreasing, so there's a negative. It's decreasing. We know that from the graph, so it has to be negative, which means when we write our factors, we have to write that negative 1 out in front to make sure that we actually get this right graph. Because we want to figure out what is this graph exactly. And if you don't include that negative 1, then you won't come up with the right answer here.